Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Pirates of the Chesapeake. Before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping to go over. Please turn your cell phones off. No ringers, no cell phones. All of our lectures are recorded and then YouTubed at a later date. So what happens is that people can hear your cell phone ringing and it comes through on our YouTube. Please be careful if you whisper to your neighbors because the equipment here and the town hall is very sensitive and it actually picks up what you have to say. Before I get started, Don Shomette came up and saw my introduction and fussed at me and said, "Grace Mary, you have to take half of that out." So he's actually really truly deserving of a 5-page introduction, but at his request, we're going to keep it really brief. And I see more people that just walked in, so give me a second. And for those that just entered, you need to please turn off your cell phones so they're not picked up by our recording equipment and heard on our YouTube. We also have 2 more chairs up here. Olivia, just so you know, if somebody comes in late, we have 2 chairs there and 1 up front. Okay, again, welcome to our lecture by Don Shomette today about the Pirates of the Chesapeake. It's going to be a very short introduction at the author's request. But before we start, I want to introduce, we have 3 elected officials who are here today. Where's Mayor Mahoney? Where's Irish? Okay, thank you for coming. Where's Larry Jaworski, Chesapeake Beach Town Council? And our own Mickey Hummel, who comes to all of our lectures and records everything for us. He is an IT guru, and Mickey is our North Beach Town Council. I need to acknowledge our sponsors today, so I want to thank the Bayside History Museum, the Calvert Library, and the Daughters of the American Revolution, all of which there are many of them in the audience today. Don Shomette has worn so many hats, he's right, it would be a 5-page introduction. But we're going to talk about his work as a historian when he served as a cultural resources management consultant for states and federal agencies, museums, universities, nonprofit research establishments in the United States and Great Britain. As a marine archaeologist, he's worked in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, under the sponsorship of institutions like the National Geographic Society, the National Park Service, the United States Navy, and various educational foundations and museums. Don is the author of more than 20 books, the most recent book being of poetry and photography, Navigational Hazards and the Award-winning History Anaconda's Trail, Civil War on the Potomac Frontier. He is a contributor to 3 international encyclopedias and 5 anthologies of history and archaeology. Because those of you in the audience today have an interest in the Pirates in the Chesapeake Bay, Don asked me to give 2 announcements. There's a heads up that the Scorpion documentary, which is now titled Invasion USA, is going to air on National Geographic Channel April 2nd at 10 o'clock at night. So if you're interested, please don't miss that. And then today we have another visiting author who has worked on 3 books with Don And all 3 books are up here on the table for you to review. So without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Don Shomette to the audience.
Thank you, Rosie. My talk today, of course, is on one of my favorite subjects, a thing that I wrote a book about 40 years ago, and is still in print, thank God. Thank you, Johnny Depp. The subject, of course, she got a first edition there, is, of course, Pirates on the Chesapeake. And I'm going to start off at the end, actually. In 1807, it was a hot August day. In 1807, a ship called the Othello. She was a merchantman from, I believe, Liverpool, on the way to Baltimore with a cargo of dry goods. And at the time, she came into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. The mouth was blockaded by a British fleet because there were 3 French 74-gun men of war here in the Chesapeake. One was anchored in the Patuxent, one at Annapolis, and one down at Hampton Roads. England and France, of course, were in the midst of the Napoleonic Wars. The Othello sailed north. She came to behind, Sharp's Island. 1,800 acres at that time, doesn't exist anymore. There's a bending light sitting out there. But at the time, the Othello came behind her. The captain of the Othello was a fellow named John Glover. And Glover went to sleep that night in his berth, and he woke up the next morning to gunfire. And he saw this schooner pulling up beside him. And it was loaded with pirates. And it was to be the last major act of piracy on the Chesapeake. But we're going to have to go back 2,000 years, because I want to give you a little bit about what piracy is. And piracy, of course, is probably the 2nd oldest profession. And it goes back, ever since man has been able to float on the water. We can go back to the ancient Greeks, and we can go back to the time of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was, as a young man, captured by pirates on the Mediterranean and ransomed. Now, those same pirates had sacked some 400 towns and villages along the Mediterranean, and they ransomed Caesar, and he got off. But then he came back, and he eradicated pirates in the Mediterranean, wiped them all out, hung them all. Piracy goes all the way through our history, Western history, Eastern history. We can go back here. This is Eustace the monk, who was working in the Straits of Dover, and he was captured and executed. Piracy has had an effect on the creation of alliances, of empires. It has actually created pirate kingdoms. Pirates in the medieval times were one of the reasons for the creation of the Hanseatic League in Northern Europe. This happens to be a German pirate who, with his 33 men, were captured in battle in 1573, and all 33 were executed. They had their heads chopped off and displayed along the city streets. And in 22 minutes, the heads were rolled, and it was considered a move forward. But piracy comes to the Western Hemisphere, largely for the same reasons it comes to other areas. There is no law, there is no order, there is no major power until the Spanish arrive. When Christopher Columbus discovers the Western Hemisphere, when he discovers the Americas, not knowing it, of course, it opens up this funnel of gold which starts running to Europe from the captured empires of the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans, all carried forth by the Spanish Empire. It becomes the Spanish Empire. South America, Central America, part of the American West, North American West, becomes the Empire of Spain. Spain becomes the mightiest nation in the Western world, the richest nation, because of the treasures of Potosi, the mountain of silver, of the treasures that are taken and then are force mined by slave labor. To get it home, they've got to protect it In the early days, they didn't protect it very much because there was nobody else here. They sent them home in the Spanish galleons, or Niles as they were called, technically. And they had this vast empire, of course, extending all the way to the Philippines, across the Pacific. The treasures of the Philippines were transported by a single ship, the largest ship in history up to that time. 1,000 passengers could be carried on it. And the Manila Galleon coming up around the Alaskan coast, down the California coast, then offloading its treasures on the western coast of what is today Mexico. The other treasures were coming up from Ecuador and Peru, coming up the south coast, down here, offloading the isthmus, carried across to Portobello. More treasures are coming from this part of South America, from Maracaibo, where the pearls are coming, the emeralds and so forth. And they gather here at, and in Colombia, in Cartagena. From there, they are joined and they all move to Havana. The treasures from the Pacific go to Veracruz. The great treasure fleets of maybe 100, 200, and sometimes 300 ships would gather, and they would go pick up the treasure at, see if I can get it here, at Veracruz. You've got to go forward, David. There we go. At Veracruz. And then they would head east, across the Gulf of Mexico, and then up the Florida Straits, within sight of the Florida coast, in the dangerous waters of the Florida Keys. This was an empire of enormous wealth. And what happens when you have wealth? You get people who want to get it. Well, one of those folks was this lady here, Elizabeth I, and one of her henchmen, a fellow named Francis Drake, who actually sets off into the New World. England is trying to get a piece of it. And he sets off into the New World on a round-the-world voyage, the first European round-the-world voyage. And in the process, off the coast of California, off of Point Reyes, he captures the Manila Galleon, the Caquifuego, and it's hugely rich. He comes back home and he is knighted. And Queen Elizabeth gets her cut. Well, he was technically a pirate because he wasn't operating under commission, but as soon as he gets home, he gets what is called a privateering commission. England and Spain are at war. Now, a privateer is different than a pirate. A pirate has no law. All he does is do what he wants. Rape, pillage, plunder, all for his life. And why do people go into piracy? Because this is what life was like. This is called Gin Lane in London. But the life of the normal citizen of Western Europe, of Asia, was divided into two groups. One was the big guys on the top, the monarchy, the nobles, and then the rest of the world, who were poverty-stricken. You didn't have much choice. You're at the bottom of the food chain. Many people turned to the sea. A British talk piece one time said that if you had a choice of going to prison or going to sea, you'd be foolish to go to sea, because going to sea is going to prison with the option, not an option, but a probability that you're going to die. 1 in 12 people in 1750 died and went to sea. Europe is spread full of wars, and many of those people who wanted to get away came to the Americas. Many of them fled to the West Indies. The Spanish, of course, controlled the West Indies, and many of these people just went to isolated islands, many onto the island of Hispaniola, which is now the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and made their livings just off of the land. They would capture feral game, and they would roast it and process it, and the process was called bucaning. And to the Spanish, they became known as the buccaneers. And pretty soon, the buccaneers, they tried to drive them out because they were not Spanish. And many of them fled to the island of Tortuga, right here, off the coast of South America, and fortified themselves because the Spanish came after them time and time again. And finally, they fought back. The Spanish treasure fleets, of course, were not treasure fleets yet. But a fellow named Pierre Legrand, with 22 men, boarded a Spanish galleon, which was loaded with the king's ransom of treasure, and captured it. And that was an inspiration, and pretty soon, piracy becomes legend throughout the Western Hemisphere, particularly in the West Indies. The pirates of the West Indies are made up of multinational people, slaves who have escaped their owners, Frenchmen, Germans, Italians, Greeks, Spaniards, and primarily Englishmen. And the European powers start using this against the Spanish, who are the mightiest power on earth. And they use this as an excuse. They use piracy. Henry Morgan, who has an army of 1,000 pirates. Henry Morgan is utilized by the monarchy of England unofficially to war against Spain. Ultimately, Henry Morgan becomes the governor of Jamaica. Other pirates like Linoy are not quite so nice. Like I said, piracy is brigandry of the lowest order. These are the lowest on the human food chain because they got no place else to go. That's the attraction. If you capture a ship, you're going to get a piece of it. You're going to get a piece of the loot. It's your way to make an entire life's income in one capture and more. Well, come to the Chesapeake Bay. What do we got? What's our treasure? Anybody here got an idea what our treasure is? Tobacco. Right. Well, beginning with Jamestown, the lure wasn't tobacco. The lure was still the West Indies. And, of course, John Smith, who has been an incredible warrior. Somebody should read his entire life. This is just the end piece of it. The rest of it is incredible. But he goes out and he maps the Chesapeake at the time, about the time when all of these gentlemen who have settled at Jamestown, nobody wants to work. God forbid, they've come here to reap the treasures. Well, it didn't work. And they're going through a period called the starving time. And the starving time, people are dying from starvation, and a number of them, led by a fellow named West, seizes one of the two ships that are at Jamestown at the time of the Swallow. And they are going to go a-pirating. They're going to go to the West Indies, and they are going to become rich, rich men. They get to the West Indies, and they are about as effective at pirating as they are at settling Jamestown. They go home, they don't capture anything. They go home, and they said, oh, those guys are losers. Don't bother sending anything to them. But it becomes the first pirates out of the Chesapeake Bay. Well, we had problems here in the Bay because, particularly in Maryland, at the very beginning. The first settlers in Maryland are not at St. Mary's City, by the way. They are on the island of Kent, which is established by this fellow, William Claiborne, who is he is the Secretary-Treasurer of Virginia. He establishes a trading settlement on Kent Island, which becomes Kent Island becomes a trading base. The fort is built there, the first slaves are bought there, the first women, the first church, the first shipbuilding, the first everything is on Kent Island. 1631. This is upsetting because he is under a Scotch signet. It's not the signet of the King of England. And the king, of course, authorizes Cecil Calvert to send his brother, Leonard Calvert, and they established a settlement in 1634 at St. Mary's. And he said, I've got the king's signet, Kent Island belongs to me. Well, Kent Island had representation in the Virginia House of Burgesses. So the first war on the Chesapeake, the first battle between English-speaking peoples in the Western Hemisphere is fought down here in Pocomoke Sound. The first naval engagement on the Chesapeake Bay. Well, Claiborne goes home as a pirate. He is tried in Admiralty Court and let go. And he fights for ownership of Kent Island until 1671, when he finally gets it about a week before he dies. But it's not the end of the pirates. It's just the beginning. War has broken out in Europe. The parliamentarians against the nobility, against the crown. Oliver Cromwell becomes supreme. Charles II loses his head. And the parliamentarians field privateers. One of those privateers comes to Maryland, a fellow named Richard Engel, and he captures Maryland. He is a privateer. He captures Maryland. The Maryland government has to flee. And Maryland's leadership ultimately has to re-invade Maryland to take it. But this is considered by the government that takes over again, the Calvert government, as belonging to the proprietary. And Engel is considered a pirate. Well, the Chesapeake becomes a target in the many wars of Europe. One of the first major raids into the Chesapeake is by the Dutch in 1667 by a fellow named Abraham Hanson. You never heard of him, but he came in and captured the whole tobacco fleet. He's a Dutchman. We don't talk about the Dutch, we only talk about us, the English. We don't talk about the Spanish. 1672, these two guys, I read a book about them, they're pretty cool guys. Evertson and Jacob Behnke's come in with a whole fleet combined from Holland and Zeeland. They capture scores of ships. They invade the Chesapeake Bay. They come into the bay. They go up the James River. They go into the Nansemond. They come up the bay. And Governor Berkeley of Virginia has to do something. He puts together a hodgepodge of guard ships that have been sent over, and they have a naval battle on the Chesapeake, and guess who loses? We did. The Dutch win. They go home. They don't go home, but they capture scores of vessels, sink a bunch more, and then head for New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. And this isn't in American history books. It's in one from the documents that we uncovered some years ago. But they captured New York, New Jersey, and Delaware and hold it for 1 year, bring it back under Dutch government, and then have to give it up by treaty in 1672 through 1673. But they are considered pirates by the English. But then true pirates really start to arrive. And one of the reasons that they are coming up here is because they can get supplies, they can get what they need. They go to the eastern shore, to the Assateague and Chincoteague, and some of the smaller islands, Monk's Island and so forth. And there they can careen their ships. They can trade with the locals. Now, one of the reasons that piracy exists is because there is a need for the goods that they provide. At the time, England was not allowing its merchants to trade with Spain or France or anybody else. So the pirates would capture it, bring it up here, and sell it ashore at Assateague, or sell it to whoever they could. If they want to sell it, the government forbids it, of course. So the government of Virginia sends out this fellow, Roger Jones, in this boat called the Catherine, to go get these guys who have just come in. A fellow named I'm having a moment here, I'm going the wrong way. John Cook. And he comes in, he's been pirating in the West Indies, and he's careening his ship over on Assateague Island. Now, he starts trading with the locals, and then he trades with the captain of the Catherine, who is later on indicted for it, but he gets off with a fair piece of cheese. He's pretty well off after this. And one of the guys who is with Cook joins up with another pirate, a guy named Sharp, this guy here, William Dampier. And he is one of the first Englishmen after Francis Drake with Sharp to circumnavigate the globe. A pirate circumnavigation of the globe. And he writes a history of this activity. It's still in print, The Emperor's Voyage, because it's a great look at the ethnicity and the foodways and lifestyles of many of the people around the world. Well, because of the growth of piracy in the West Indies, the Virginians and the Marylanders are asking for protection. Send a ship in, send somebody in here to protect us. We don't have the money to protect ourselves. Now, at this time, Virginia is the richest colony in English America. Maryland is the second. So they send this ship in, HMS Dumbarton. And the captain of the Dumbarton is a fellow named John Rowe. John Rowe. And Captain Rowe is parked down in Hampton Roads. And at the time, one of the ways that the English are able to reduce piracy is to offer an amnesty. If you guys turn yourself in, all of your crimes will be forgiven. Just don't do it again. The trick is, you got to get to a justice of the peace in an accepted province or place. Well, Simon Rowe, Rowe is sitting down there in Hampton Roads when these four guys come down in a small boat. They crossed over from the Atlantic to Bohemia River and then down. They had been pirating in the West Indies. They had raided the Isthmus of Panama. They came away with a king's ransom, and it was all on their small boat. Well, Simon Rowe captures it, and he says, okay, you guys are pirates, you're under arrest. And he said, since I've got this prize is mine. Well, the governor of Virginia said, no, wait a minute, hold it. It's mine. The pirate said, no, we're going to collect our amnesty. We are going to be free. Simon said, no, Simon says, you didn't get to home base first. You did not get to the justice of the peace. So the case goes on. The pirates are in jail down in Middlesex County for several years, and finally they orchestrate their removal home. By the way, they have to pay for their visit to jail out of the treasury. The governor is trying to get his, and Rowe is trying to get his, and other people are trying to get it too. The king is trying to get it, William III. So they finally do get home, and this guy up here at the top, Dr. James Blair, the Bishop of London, says to the pirates, he said, look, I'll make a deal with you. If I get a piece of your treasure, I will get you free. And he makes a deal with the King of England, and the King of England goes along with it. And Dr. James Blair uses that money to create William and Mary College on pirate loot. But it's not the last of the pirates. It's just beginning. I can't go into all of them, but in 1699, a fellow named John James comes in, and there is a guard ship here called the Essex Prize, and his ship is called the Providence Galley, and he's got a huge amount of treasure. All of his seamen have gold toothpicks hanging from their necks. Now, a gold toothpick is what a Spanish admiral would wear. So all of his men have got them. These guys have been doing pretty well in the West Indies, and they come in, and Aldred takes off. He doesn't really want to fight. He's a coward, sort of. And John James captures some ships and leaves. Well, the governor of Virginia, Francis Nicholson, who was also the governor of Maryland, and had been the governor of New York. Nobody's ever written his biography, by the way. Francis Nicholson says, okay, we've got to do something. And just at that moment, a Royal Navy guard ship, HMS Shoreham, comes in. And the Shoreham is commanded by a fellow named John Passenger, who is a go-to fighter. And so Aldred Passenger and the governor of Virginia board the Shoreham, and they go out to fight the latest fleet of pirates who come in, commanded by a fellow named Luis Guitar, who had been a planter on Barbados, and decides he was going to go pirating. And he's got a ship called La Paix, which means peace, or the peace. La Paix and Shoreham engage. This is a monumental pirate versus king battle. It's like something you would see in the movies. And finally, La Paix is beaten down. She is a total wreck. And when she is surrendered, all the pirates said, we will surrender, but we got 50 prisoners on board. If you don't give us justice in England, we're going to blow up the ship and all the 50 prisoners. And Francis Nicholson said, okay. And he does. And he sends them back to England, sends the La Paix back as a prize, and all of those pirates are hung. It's the largest pirate execution in British history. Well, anybody recognize this guy? Captain Kidd. Arr! Well, Captain Kidd actually starts out life as a pirate chaser. He is supposed to go and help reduce piracy in the Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf, where English pirates are operating. But he sees it as a rich turnover, and he too becomes a pirate. He is operating under a privateer commission right here from the King of England, but he becomes a pirate, and he flees back to the Americas, figuring he's going to be well received. And there's a lot of stories about Captain Kidd and his treasure. He buries his treasure, sinking a Bible with the treasure so that he's cursing anybody who will come in. That's a complete bunch of hooey, but it makes the storybooks. He is ultimately captured and tried and executed, and his body is hung up for everybody to see as a warning to all pirates. This becomes tradition. It has been tradition for piracy in Europe. Captain Kidd's treasure, buried at Gardner's Island on Long Island Sound. False. That's the list of the treasure right there, which is taken off of him, off of his ship. And so there is no Captain Kidd treasure. Well, Europe has been at war for 13 years, I think it was, and the War of Spanish Succession. And in 1713, all the warring powers agreed to a treaty. Now, in that war, all the European powers had major naval fleets and thousands of privateers operating for each of the nations. Well, when the war is over, all of a sudden, all of those nations reduce their navies and no more privateers. And all of a sudden, you have thousands and thousands of men out of work. Well, as fate would have it, in 1715, 2 years later, a Spanish treasure fleet is lost on the coast of Florida, on the Florida Keys. It is one of the richest fleets to travel and to be lost in the Western Hemisphere. The only bigger one, I think, is in 1708 off of Cartagena. And that fleet goes down, and all of these folks who are unemployed, who have been migrating, looking for jobs in the West Indies, primarily in the Bahamas, are all of a sudden lured. Here's this treasure in 20 feet of water, 15 feet of water. And they come over from New Providence Island to harvest it. The treasure is there, and they are starting to bring it up. The Spanish don't like that. So the Spanish, of course, send men in, fleets in, ships in, and fortifying and defending their treasure. But these guys on New Providence Island, the Bahama Islands, they got no place to go. So they go back and they start gathering together, and they start going into piracy. They start looking for the treasures of the Americas. Big time. New Providence becomes sort of a pirate kingdom. They fortify. They defend themselves. They've got a whole entourage there. The government of England is really worried about this migrating north into the English colonies, and they send a guy named Woodes Rogers to stop all of this activity. Rogers comes over armed with that old way of stopping pirates, amnesty. And he offers amnesty to the pirates, and New Providence settles down. If you accept amnesty, you get to keep what you got, but you don't do it again, or you will be hung if they capture you. Well, there's a lot of people who don't accept it. These are the various pirate flags of the various pirates who did not accept it. There are many more. At any given time between 1716 and 1724, you could find 20 pirate ships off the Virginia coast, operating, interdicting everything. Piracy becomes a big business. The governors of New York, Pennsylvania, North Carolina join with the pirates. They start taking a piece of the action. Have we ever known that before? Pirate culture is interesting because pirates, of course, are very brutal. They are murderous, they are killers, they are rapists. They do everything awful. But among themselves, the Brethren of the Coast, as they call themselves, the Brethren of the Coast have their own laws. When you are a pirate ship, you enlist, you got to sign that or put your X on it. You get a piece of insurance. If you lose your ear in battle, you get so much of a treasure. You're guaranteed your cut. If you bring a woman on board and do something that's wrong, you can do it ashore, but that's okay. But on somebody else's ship, but not on board a pirate ship. There's all kinds of laws that are set up, and we know this because we have some of them that exist. But they are brutal. Piracy is brutal. Piracy is murder. You know, recreation is killing people. If you don't like a Dutchman, you take him out and you hang him. And they did hang whole crews that didn't enlist with the pirates. There's a lot of falsehoods about piracy. Walking the plank, as Howard Pyle illustrates here, is one of the myths of piracy. And arr, that's also a myth. Most of you here, I imagine at some point in time, has seen Walt Disney's Treasure Island. And Captain, I'm sorry, what's his name? Peg leg guy.
Long John Silver.
Long John Silver, thank you. Seniority. Long John Silver, the fellow playing him, during a break in the shooting, he was drunk at the moment. He was over there mimicking his role, and he said, "Arr!" And the director said, "Use that." And that became part of the movie. And today, that is part of the story of piracy. Well, pirates, of course, divided up their loot after they captured something, and it was an equal division. Everybody got so much. You elected, it was the first democracy. Piracy elected their officers. The captain only commanded in battle. There was a code of conduct, and it was not always followed, of course, but it was a pretty good way to go. Some of the pirate lore, such as burying your treasure, was stupid because it only happened once or twice. Once from a ship that was captured, or treasure that was captured from a Spanish galleon that ran ashore off of Assateague Island in 1750, and the pirates who captured some of the treasure went down to St. Thomas and buried it in a little island out there, which was later recovered. But there's almost no pirate burials. The pirate's life is short and brief. To live to be 35, you are an old man. One in 12 men who went to sea in 1750 didn't come home. Then just General C. Some people did retire. John James retired. Captain Avery established a pirate kingdom on Madagascar. Went home to England and wrote a play about his life. Some people did retire, but those who didn't stay by the rules would sometimes be treated badly. They would be marooned on an island. And of course, marooned pirates like Alexander Selkirk He ends up in later literature. Robinson Crusoe. Pirate symbols like the skull and crossbone, the hourglass. These are from Madagascar, where a pirate kingdom was established. And a Bible with no words on it. And the angel of death were all symbols that pirates used on their flags and so forth. In 1717, those pirates who didn't accept came to the Chesapeake. They came to the Chesapeake big time. The Chesapeake Bay became blockaded. A number of folk pirates like Benjamin Hornigold blockaded the Chesapeake and captured ships out there. Some people joined them. One of the pirates, who was a little different, who blockaded the Chesapeake and the Carolina coast, was this guy, Stede Bonnet. Well, Stede Bonnet was unusual in that most pirates captured their ships. Stede Bonnet bought one. Most pirates' crews came from other ships they captured or people who wanted to join them. He went around, he was a Barbadian planter, and he went around the island and said, anybody want to sign up? I'm going to pirating. And he paid them a wage. That's not pirating. Well, one of the guys he hooked up with was this guy here. Blackbeard the pirate, famous pirate. Blackbeard was a clever guy. He had been a privateersman, Edmund Drummond, or Captain Edward Teach. He's got a bunch of different names. Blackbeard swindles Stede Bonnet out of his boat and gives him a lesser boat. And right soon afterwards, Bonnet is out there coming out of Ocracoke Inlet, going down to South Carolina, and he gets captured by the government, and he's hung. He's a gentleman pirate, and everybody cried at his funeral. But Blackbeard, he was the epitome of the pirate, and he was different. He ruled by absolute fear. You're not electing me. If you aren't with me, I'm going to cut your head off. And he did. And he ruled by fear, and he was a partner with Governor Eden of North Carolina. Allegedly, he accepted the amnesty, but he establishes his base at Ocracoke Inlet. And from there, he is capturing ships all up and down, and Governor Eden's getting a piece of it. He goes down to Charleston, South Carolina, and blockades the city. Captures a couple ships coming in, blockades the city. He's in need of medicine for his crew, and he gets it, and he sails away. In the meantime, at Ocracoke Inlet, other pirates are assembling. Captain Charles Vane's another one who didn't accept the amnesty, comes up there, and he organizes a convention of pirates. It's the largest assemblage of pirates in the Western Hemisphere in one place on the North American continent. And this really gets the governor of Virginia upset. Governor Spotswood is really concerned. They're going to come in, they're going to bother us. So all the provinces are different governments. Eden's is a different government than Virginia's government, and each has their own proprietary. But Governor Spotswood says, we're going to invade North Carolina, and sends an army of men down to capture Eden, which is the pirate stronghold. Their ships are at Ocracoke, and he sends another expedition aboard two ships called the Jane and the Ranger. They have no cannon on board, and they're commanded by the oldest lieutenant in the Royal Navy with volunteers, because there's a 100-pound prize on Blackbeard's head. They enter the Sound, and pretty soon they have to board the pirate, or the pirate has to board them, because they fake like the decks have been swept by the pirate artillery. And Blackbeard sees nobody on deck, and he comes on board. He boards his men thinking he's got the ship. And all of a sudden, John Maynard, the captain, Lieutenant Maynard, appears from below with his men, and the biggest pirate battle occurs. The decks literally run red with blood, and Maynard and Blackbeard square off, sword to sword. Blackbeard's been shot, he's been stabbed, but nothing stops this. This guy's 6'6". Maynard's about 5'2", small guy. So Maynard is beaten down pretty quick. Blackbeard's arm is like a windmill. He's about to ready to bring it down when a guy comes up and cuts his throat. Maynard wins. Blackbeard's head is cut off and brought on board his ship at the time, the Adventure, and brought back to Hampton Roads and mounted at Blackbeard Point. It's so-called Blackbeard Point. And it stands there for years until the head falls off. Somebody cut the top of it off and made a drinking cup out of the head. And it was said that it was lined with gold, that you could join a certain fraternity in North Carolina by drinking a draft of rum from Blackbeard's head. Fiction. The pirates are really upset. Pirate brethren are upset. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of his day, been raiding all over the place. He's got a fleet of ships, and he swears, I'm going to capture the governor of Virginia. I'm going to capture Governor Spotswood, and I'm going to cut his head off. Spotswood, who's called home, refuses to sail for 2 years until Roberts himself is captured and is defeated in a battle off of Africa between a guy named Challoner and the Royal Fortune. Some people ask about women pirates. Yeah, there were women pirates. There was a woman in the Chesapeake called Logan. But the most famous pirates of all were with this guy, Jack Rackham, who was a crummy pirate. Couldn't do anything, but the women loved him. These two ladies, one was a well-to-do person who went off, and the other one was pregnant at the time. And anyhow, they joined Rackham as men. One was following her husband who was killed in war. She was dressed as a man throughout the war until her husband was killed. And then she goes a pirating as a man. Both of them become Rackham's lovers. He impregnates one of them. And he is ultimately captured and executed. And the women, one of them isn't executed because she's pregnant. And the other one just kind of disappears because she was the daughter of a very rich man. Well, in 1724, all of this is recorded. This guy, Captain Charles Johnson, writes the history of them and the robberies of the most notorious pirates. And he writes under a nom de plume. His real name is Daniel Defoe. And that book is still out there in the public domain. You can buy it in any bookstore. The wars are over. The pirate wars are pretty much over. A couple flare-ups from time to time, but now we start having our homebred pirates. We are now back in the Chesapeake Bay in the pre-revolutionary days, and piracy is operating in the bay for small stuff. Little guys operating out of the eastern shore primarily, out of Deal Island, out of Tangier Island, sometimes the Nanticoke or the Wacomico, and they are capturing small tobacco boats and they're selling them on the black market. It's all small stuff until the American Revolution comes along. When the American Revolution arrives, this all changes. The Eastern Shore has an awful lot of loyalists, and they form large guerrilla bands under commissions by the British government, the Royal Navy. And they start raiding. They come into the Patuxent River. They raid up, capture Benedict. They capture Lower Marlborough. They capture Nottingham. In the Patuxent River, there's no government. We have a Navy, but Continental Navy is worthless. The Maryland State Navy, which we have, is almost non-existent now. It's already been beaten. And the merchants of the Patuxent River formed the Board of Patuxent Associators to combat these folks. They actually have a ship called the Nautilus, which had been a privateer. The remains are still down there right off of Nottingham. I've been on them. They built a couple of forts down at Holland Point, other places on the Patuxent, and the piracy stops. But after the war, a number of these loyalists have no place to go. The people who have no place to go, what do? They go back to pirating. Most of them are freed slaves, African Americans, who have been working with the Loyalists. Most of them are captured and summarily executed. The last act of piracy. The Othello being captured by a pirate ship called the General Messina. Where did the General Messina come from? The General Messina came from one of those 74 gunmen of war, which is anchored under Drum Point in the Patuxent River. She's there for a year. She came in 1806, driven in by the British fleet, which is blockading us, blockading them in, and she's got 800 men aboard. There's no place for these guys to go. You know what it's like being on board a vessel that's 140 feet long with 800 other guys in August? Yeah. And it smells. And they are dependent upon getting supplies from Baltimore. Well, in August of 1807, the ship, it's called La Patria, one of Napoleon's ships, and La Patria is commanded by a German named Hyacinth Krom. And La Patria, Krom sends a small boat to Baltimore to bring in supplies for his ship, waiting, hoping the British will escape or will leave. And that boat goes to Baltimore, and on the way up, the fellows on the boat said, "Hey, we're not going back. Why don't we go pirating?" Okay, good idea. So they get a ship in Baltimore, a schooner called the General, and they name it General Messina after one of Napoleon's generals. And they come down to the bay, and they intercept the Othello off, which is anchored behind Sharp's Island. They capture the Othello, and the captain of the Othello says, "Gentlemen, are you sure you want to do this? You're in the Chesapeake Bay. There is a blockade at the mouth of the bay. There is a U.S. Navy warship in Hampton Roads. There's another one at Baltimore in case you didn't see it. And they're likely to send out a lot of people after you." And the pirates go, "Oh, okay, here, take your stuff back. We're not pirates, we just playing." And they went back. They went back to Drum Point. Some of them went aboard La Patria and of course were punished, questionably for desertion. Others stayed aboard the General Messina. Well, one of the first to look for the pirates to actually engage them, a ship called the Volunteer, comes down from Baltimore and comes right up to the General Messina, right off of La Patria, and they open fire. And it's the last pirate battle, classic pirate battle in the Chesapeake. Most of the pirates made it ashore. Some of them may have gone into banking in California, I don't know. But some of them went into government, right? Tax, IRS. But it was one of the last acts. But piracy itself took on a new form, and its last form. For a new type of gold. Oysters. Oysters of the Chesapeake Bay in the 1870s and the 1880s was gold. 2,000 to 3,000 vessels chartered in Maryland and Virginia are out harvesting this gold. And the consequence is that Maryland and Virginia oystermen start fighting over turf. Maryland creates its own oyster navy, Virginia creates its own oyster navy to protect its turf. In 1870, after the Civil War, Isaac Solomon goes to Solomon's Island, or what is now Solomon Johnson's Island at the time, and establishes, he's a carpetbagger, he establishes a cannery there. He and some Baltimore guys end up with a fleet of over 100 oyster vessels, and it becomes a major industry in southern Maryland. Well, the Virginia oyster pirates in a fleet come up the bay off of Cedar Point, and they engage in harvesting the oysters, but the Maryland charter have got a property on, right off of Cedar Point where the naval base is today. And the Marylanders go into Solomon's Island and said, can't you send somebody out? Well, there's this boat, this tugboat from New Jersey, called the New Jersey, and she is armed. They arm her and they said, okay, go take the pirates out. Well, the pirates are armed. The New Jersey is armed. They go out and they engage the pirates off of Cedar Point. The pirate captain, the Virginia oysterman, is brought in, he's captured, and he's brought into Solomon's Island, and the Calvert County judge fines him $50 and said, you're free, go get out of here. The next night, the same guy comes back to Solomon's Island in an attempt to burn down the cannery, all of the houses in Solomon's Island, and he fails. But he does destroy the New Jersey. And it is the last act of real piracy in Maryland waters. Blackbeard's ship is one of the few things that is left. One of his ships, the Queen Anne's Revenge, has been excavated in Virginia. In North Carolina. That's one of the cannons from it. Some of the medicines that were, medical bottles that were taken from Charleston were aboard. A lot of the items, this is from actually a Royal Navy warship that is similar to the types of things. This one was sunk off of Delaware. It was excavated some years ago, which I was working with the state of Delaware. But typical types of stuff that you would find on board a ship. The grand age of piracy is over. Or is it? We have enshrined pirates in our legends. Johnny Depp, my God, how many movies has he made? Errol Flynn becomes the epitome of the pirate, the noble pirate, the wrong pirate, the guy who's got a heart of gold, loves the women love him, which is all hogwash. But that becomes part of the American psyche, when in truth, piracy is with us today around the world. It is costing billions and billions of dollars. Somalian pirates here. The UN has a whole address to piracy on the open oceans. In just a very short time, 2,148 acts of piracy around the world. America, the Mediterranean, Africa, East Asia, the Indian Ocean, they're all over. Piracy today is still with us. And the cause is still the same as it was then. Poverty, class distinction, the bottom layer of humanity has nowhere to go. They become criminals, they become the bottom of the human food chain. Get rich quick, live long, forget that. Live happy, live joyfully. Be brutal, doesn't matter. But piracy is still with us, and it's still caused by the same things. And I don't think we will ever get rid of it. I thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Since our beach crowd, I was in the Philippines a number of years ago, and we were in the South China Sea. And we were approached by what's called a banca.
Right.
They're powered, really, canoes,
Right.
50, 60
But they're
feet.
fast.
And they roared at us at a high rate of speed. The skipper of the boat brought up a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-pound banana clip on it and held it up, and they turned around and went away. Had we not done that, well, we could kill them.
Yeah, the piracy today is, it is murder. And there are rogue nations like Burma or Myanmar, which are signatories to an anti-pirate organization which is based in Jakarta, which is Japan, the Philippines, Myanmar, Vietnam, all of the Southeast Asian nations are signatories. But Myanmar, which is under military government, of course, is a place where the pirates can go. The Straits of Malacca, where an enormous amount of oil, 1/3 of the world's oil goes through the Straits of Malacca, and they are targets. And the anti-pirate organization, which is based in Jakarta, with Myanmar as one of its members, is in a dicey situation. They do warn, they have warning. The United States has had ships actually in the Indian Ocean when pirates have attacked American ships and have largely brought it down in our zones of interest. The East Asian operations, however, are kind of dicey because when a ship is captured, an oil freighter or an oil tanker, sometimes even the big ones, which are captured by the pirates, they have anti-pirate means, which is spraying water out and keeping them off because they're high-decked critters. If you've seen the movie some time ago about a freighter being captured, it's pretty close to the truth. But they are taken to Myanmar, they are painted, the oil is put back on the market. There's a black market for oil all around the world. The oil is put back on the market, and the ship gets new papers, looks new, she's changed a little bit, gets back out there on the world stage, hauling oil again. This is done over and over again. It's a problem we have today in all forms, South American, but particularly off the coast of Africa and Southeast Asia. Any other questions? Yes?
There's been going back in time again. One of your slides had a picture of two men, when you were talking about the Dutch time, it was Ivinson and
I couldn't hear you.
one of your slides back a ways had a picture of, I think it was Ivinson and Lindsay.
Yes.
Okay, and I was trying to figure out what was in the picture. I could see it looked like he was holding a gun, but there was something sticking out.
Arabus.
Erebus?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a gun.
Oh, it's a gun. Part of it sticking out here? Okay.
I think it's a matchlock. Her question was what types of guns were those Iverson and Benke's. One was a pistol, one was, I believe, an arabesque. Any other questions?
Wanted you to, if you could bring up the slide of the Oyster Navy boat in far again. Are you sure that's a tugboat or is it representative of the tugboat?
It's a representative.
Yeah, I think that's
That was
McLean.
That was Frank Leslie's.
Yeah, that's the McLean. If
Yeah.
you want to see that ship, she's sunk in front of the Baltimore
Right.
Museum of Industry.
I have a picture of her.
And I have one of the shells that fit the cannon on the deck. The second cannon, the first cannon is actually in the little museum in Annapolis. It was original from Confederacy.
Yeah, and some of these pictures are representational because there is nothing on the individuals or the images. But yeah, I believe that is the government plane, and she was part of the Oyster Navy. Yes?
I got here a little late, but what book would you recommend?
Mine?
Well, did they have it here? I was.
No, I don't have it here. She's got one. She's got a hard. It's also in paperback.
At the library, Amazon.
At the library,
Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, the Calvert Museum has got them. There are no
I figured you had one.
bookstores now,
Thank you.
but it's out there. It's on its 11th printing, 40 years.
Impressive. Have you done updates? On the 11th print, have you added more updates as you've gone, or it's just the?
No, it went into 2 editions. The second edition, I changed a couple of names that were updated.
So you would recommend the second edition?
Yeah, if you get the second edition, it's in hardbound. They're hard to come by, the hardbound.
What is the title, please?
Pirates on the Chesapeake.
Okay, thank you.
It's a hard one to remember.
It's a challenge.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you are interested, we have a couple of books that George Miller and I have worked on. One is one that I have written, but the other, we've worked on all 3 together. Yes?
It's